Hi everyone, thank you very much for coming to this afternoon session on the critical infrastructure stage. I'm Emily Auckland, I'm the Network Director of the UK Stakeholders for Sustainable Development, or UK SSD. We bring organisations together to accelerate progress on the UN Sustainable Development Goals in the UK. So today we're going to be talking about what these goals are, what they might mean to different professions, and how we need to do more in the UK to deliver this agenda. But before we do that, I just want to set the scene and make sure that we're all at the same level of understanding. So, I'm sure you're all familiar with the Sustainable Development Goal icons. Maybe just put your hand up if you've seen them before. Great. The goals were agreed by world leaders in 2015. There are 17 of them with 169 accompanying targets. And together they represent every facet of life on Earth, so they cover environmental, social and economic issues. They seek to eradicate poverty, to address inequalities, and to combat the climate and ecological emergency. Now, there's a few things that they direct us to do as a framework. So the first thing is to recognise that we live in a very connected and systemic society. So everything we do has positive or negative impacts elsewhere, and we need to kind of understand these connections. So although there are 17 goals, they're actually all joined up, and they do actually all work together. You can't just single out one goal and say this is the priority. They're also universal, so they apply to every single country as much as any other. Therefore, they require us all to work together, because actually as single organisations, as single governments, we can't achieve these issues, we can't achieve this agenda and the ambition of these goals if we work on our own. So we have to work collaboratively, cross-sector, cross-industry. One of the really important things to remember about the SDGs is that they also contain other international agreements. So the Paris Climate Agreement, which is one of the big themes of Future Build this year, is actually contained within the goals. In Goal 13, the ambition of Paris is there. But what does this mean to the UK context? We talk about this as a big global agenda. It's actually an agenda in the UK too. In 2018, UK SSD published a report that looked at how the UK is performing on every single one of the SDG targets. There are 169 of them, but 143 are domestically applicable to the UK context. So with the help of over 100 organisations and with the work of 17 lead authors, we considered how the UK is performing on the indicators, so from a data point of view, what's going on in the UK, what the statistics tell us, but also in terms of policy. Actually, do we have the right policy in place in this country? And the results are that the UK is only performing well on 24% of those targets. So those are the dots that are green here. For the remaining targets, we're either performing inadequately or our performance is poor. And I can really summarise this in two ways. That's just a different representation of that information. Thank you. Throwing things around. I can summarise it in two ways. The first way is that actually in the UK, people and places are being left behind. So we've got high levels of inequality and poverty in this country, and levels that are really unacceptable for a country that is developed and has the capacity and resources we do. And the other side is that we're consuming far too many of the Earth's resources in a way that isn't sustainable. So our way of life is degrading ecosystems and causing massive issues like climate change. So 2020 marks a really important milestone for the SDGs. We've got 10 years to achieve this agenda. And I know that that can seem like that's a lot of work and we're never going to get there, because it is complex and it is challenging and these goals are very ambitious. But actually, I think if you look back at human history and look at what we've been able to achieve when we've really tried and when we've really worked together, it is possible. We can actually do this. We just need to be thinking ambitiously and thinking about what we could do together in this new era of global partnerships. So to recognise the urgency, in January we launched our action plan for the SDGs in the UK, and really it creates a focal point for the collective efforts of our network. There are three pillars of focus for us, and they all form an action plan for the next 10 years with specific things we'll do in the next couple of years. So examples of this include advocating for better implementation within the UK government, so working with the UK government to help them to implement this agenda, but also working at a local level with local governments. They're actually really important sustainable development actors, so we need to do more to support local government. We are repeating our report of Measuring Up, so we'll look again at how the UK is performing on the SDGs. We're going to do that every 5 years, but we'll do shorter snapshot reports every year. So we'll do a new one this year, which will look specifically at food in the UK and how the UK is performing on food-related targets. And then the final area of work is really about this idea of working together, collaboration. What do we need to do? So we've launched cross-sector systems programs where we'll bring together different organisations and work together to drive the agenda forward in key areas. So the first one again is on food, but we're talking to our network about other areas where we should be working in this kind of cross-sector model. So that's enough from me. I'm not going to talk anymore, other than to ask some challenging questions of our panelists. We've assembled a group of representatives from some of the professional institutions that are really driving forward this agenda through various interventions and programs in their organisations. I'm going to ask them some difficult questions about what they can do to really ramp up progress given this 10-year framework, but also we will explore what this might mean to you and what you might take away from this session and apply to your own work. And obviously, we want this to be interactive, so we do really want to have a discussion with you and understand what you're finding challenging about this agenda and how we might be able to help. But before we do that, I'm going to invite someone to the stage who I think will put a better context on this in terms of why this is important to the UK. She's someone that I respect a lot, and I've known her for a while, and I'm sure that you'll be very interested in what she's got to say. So Dr. Wanda Wojpowska from the Equality Trust, please come to the stage. I've got to do some clever jiggery pokery. Oh. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Emily. We're in a little bit of competition with the sound system over there, so do let me know if you can't hear me.
You don't have to just scream, it's loud enough.
Okay, great, thank you. I have to say, the last time that I was here was at Comic-Con. So although the queues were a bit longer, the costumes were really a little bit brighter than I've seen here today. I'm director of the Equality Trust, and the purpose of the Equality Trust is to tackle social and economic inequality. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to focus on goal 10, because I also think that if we focus on goal 10, we can also reduce some and work on some of the other goals that are included, such as gender, poverty, etc. So I'm going to start off by looking at how unequal is income in different countries. So if you look there, you can see that the UK is 7th most unequal country in the OECD. And why is this important? This is important because we know that the OECD, the World Bank, the CBI have all said that inequality, economic inequality, is one of the biggest problems after climate change. And even if you don't buy the moral case, which I will explain a little bit later, for reducing inequality, they've also said that high levels of inequality is bad for economic growth. It provides the wrong type of economic growth. It provides a sluggish growth. If we look at the spread of incomes in the UK, we can see the disparity between the poorest tenth, the second decile, the third decile, the fourth and fifth, which are fairly similar, and the richest tenth. And that gives you an indication. We've had high levels of income inequality in the UK since the 1980s. And you may be thinking, what's that got to do with Future Build? What's that got to do with the SDGs? Well, the reason this is really important for everybody is because inequality damages everybody in the fabric of society. Research has shown that in countries with high levels of inequality, you also see higher levels of socially determined ills. And these are issues that we should all be caring about because they affect our workers, they affect our employees, they affect our customers, our consumers, they affect our systems of government as well at a local level, at a national level, and as well at a global level. So we see here that in countries with high levels of inequality, we also see lower levels of life expectancy, lower levels of life expectancy. And you may have heard the coverage of the Marmot Review last week. showing that actually life expectancy in the UK is going down, and for poorer women it's going down even more. Now this is the first time really this has happened for over 100 years, and it's an indication of where we are as a society. We also see higher levels of infant mortality, higher levels of homicides, higher level of imprisonment, higher levels of drug and alcohol addiction, higher levels of obesity, and higher levels of mental and physical ill health. Now, all of these things, for each of you, will have a different impact on the business that you're in, on the people that you employ, and on the area that you work in, and also on your global and national perspective. We also see lower levels of educational attainment, lower levels of trust, which obviously has implications for our democratic systems, and I think we've seen a little bit of that over the past couple of years, to say the least, and also lower levels of social mobility. Now, I started the day talking on a panel at the Roundhouse, a gig venue in Camden, and we were talking about diversity and inclusion, and we were talking about the lack of diverse people coming through, particularly in the arts and the creative sectors. And I did a piece of work with IEMA a couple of years ago about looking at the diversity or lack of diversity in the workforce, or dealing with built environment, dealing with architecture, dealing with infrastructure. And I think that's a really important point to make, not just because, again, for the moral reasons that we should have more diverse workforces, but also because people coming from different backgrounds and from different experiences will bring a different creative force, will bring a different experience. One of the problems that we have is that if we have that monocultural thinking, we're all thinking of the same solutions. And in creative industries, in engineering, in industries where we need ideas, where we need to have different perspectives, then it's really important that we see this. And it's really important that we have this in terms of how we tackle the SDGs as well. One of the frustrating things about the Sustainable Development Goals has been that word development, because it's allowed most people, and even government to some extent, to put it in the foreign corner, to put it as something that this is something that we're talking to other countries about, this is something for our foreign aid. But actually it's really essential, because you, better than I, know what a global community we are in, how the economics globally are affecting your business, are affecting your sector. And so we have to tackle the SDGs as a community, as a global community. So just to remind and to give a bigger picture of those SDGs, it's absolutely essential, and we can all see this in the various sectors that we work in, to tackle these SDGs in the 10 years that we have. We may not have 10 years if we don't sort the climate crisis out, is the obvious thing to say. And what I will say is some of the SDGs are contradictory. If we look at the ones for growth, then we may need another couple of planets to enact those. But as a framework and as an international commitment, as a framework for what you're doing, but also as a framework that we can hold government to account for, it's absolutely essential. And it's probably one of the first times that we've had global agreement on the fact that we do need to do something to save the planet. We do need to reduce inequality. We do need gender equality. And though I've spoken at a global and a macro level, what I would also urge you to do is to look within your own organisations. So the Equality Trust has just carried out a piece of research on examining the FTSE 100 in terms of its CEO pay ratios, which links to reducing inequalities, looking at the gender pay gap and the gender bonus gap, looking at low pay, obviously links to number 1 and number 5. And I would urge all of you, there's something you can all do when you leave this room, which is look inside your own organisations and see if you're actually using this framework within your own organisations, and if you're living up to the SDGs within your own organisations and other organisations you may be trustees of or maybe have some influence over. Because make no mistake, this is a huge job, and I'm tempted to quote what everyone's saying about coronavirus, sorry, but it's up to all of us. This will not happen if we just leave it to the people in power. We all have to play our part, because we all want that better society, and the SDGs is the best framework we've got for getting that better society. Thank you.
Yes, very happy to answer that one, Emily. So my role at RICS is leading a campaign entitled Value the Planet, and it has two core purposes, one of which is to really advocate for the UN SDGs with our own professionals. So we have over 120,000 chartered surveying professionals who offer a range of professional expertise across the built and natural environment. And it's absolutely critical that they take on board all of the elements that Vanda was just talking about. There are so many critical decisions that are made through clients and professionals operating in the built and natural environment that have a huge impact on our achievement of the SDGs. Second aspect of the campaign is really to shine a light on some of the fantastic work that is happening within the built environment. We launched our Social Impact Awards in October 2018. We'll have the grand final in September this year, and it will showcase real excellent examples of organisations that are taking sustainable development seriously and showing the social impacts of their work.
Well, okay. Happy to answer that one too. And actually, I am only a month into my gig at the IC, so if you ever want to catch me uninstitutionalised, this is the moment. So make sure you got some good questions. I might answer them honestly for the first and only time. But look, what have we been doing at the institution? Well, I think we've been doing quite a bit actually. 2 years ago, we hosted the World Engineering Congress at the IC, a 5-day event. We invited people all over the world to come, and the entire subject was how we do deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals. So we had a big event, which is lovely. Everyone has big events, and that was nice. But what's come out of the big event? Well, you could be honest and say not much, but actually some good stuff is coming out, and I'm just going to bring up one thing. We have an R&D fund at the ICA. It's always good to talk about money, particularly late in the day. People can bid for up to £25,000 of enabling money to do R&D. And as a result of the SDGs and as a result of the conference, we are currently calling for funding on things that align to SDG 6, 7, 9, 11 and 13. There's a test there for those who know what those ones all are. I'm sure you all do. But we are genuinely looking to invest money in people with bright ideas to trigger some research, some development into things that might help address those SDGs. And just one very quick example of something we have been doing. We have given some money to a project built around measuring the impact of an individual on an individual project basis on achieving the SDG goals. We've been working with the Environment Agency and Thames Tideway on this. EA have used Boston Barrier as one of their big projects as an example. Tideway has obviously used the Tideway Tunnel. And we've got it now to a proof of concept where it looks like it could work, and actually now we're in discussion with Bays as to how to move it forward. So I think that's quite a huge example of how someone, it wasn't us, came to us with a bright idea, and we've given them some seed money, and it might end up changing the world. Who knows? So that's what we're up to anyway.
Okay, thanks. So I think Chartered Institution of Water and Environmental Management, water is at the heart of everything that we do. And possibly because of that, we contributed directly to the analysis under the Measuring Up report on SDG 6. And so I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the findings of that and how the UK is going on water, and then really looking at what we as an organisation are doing to try and tackle those challenges internally, spread more across the range of the SDGs. So in terms of SDG 6 and the UK's really been shooting at that since about 1858 with the Great Stink in London. So quite a run-up really to, I don't know that
fixed by a civil engineer, I'd like to point out.
Okay, fair. And really the headlines as far as that is concerned is that in the UK 99.8% of people have access to clean water, and around 99% of people have access to adequate sanitation, and there is an equitable component to that requirement, and I think that's probably where we're failing on the sanitation side in terms of equitable access. But if you dig deeper into those targets, it really, whilst those on your RAG rating were green, there's some far bigger challenges which are really quite knotty and complex to solve. So, for example, on environmental water quality, we're still seeing too many pollution incidents, spills from combined sewer overflows, or serious incidents from water treatment works. We still have a big problem with diffuse pollution, both urban diffuse pollution from road runoff and sewer misconnections, and rural diffuse pollution from farming and other land management. We've got a whole raft of emerging contaminants coming down the pipe, so to speak, towards us. Everything from PFAS to microplastics, which are highly persistent in the environment. We don't really know what their impacts are, and they really are difficult to treat at the end of pipe. They need upstream management, which involves a lot of participation and collaboration with other parties. There's a whole load of other detail I could go into, and maybe I will later on in this chat. But just in terms of applying the SDGs within SciWEM, we declared a climate and ecological emergency in the summer, and we set out 7 headline pledges as a result of that, and those touch really on not only our operational activities, but right across to how we support and develop our members as professionals. And we're in the process of preparing a detailed action plan to tackle that. But at the same time, we've been looking at the SDG Action Manager, which has been developed by B Corps or B Labs, and what we're finding is that actually that's a really useful mechanism to help us target in on which actions we really need to prioritize as part of that action plan. The other point I'd like to make is that we set a net zero aspiration under this emergency for 2030, and that really nicely ties into the 2030 target for the SDGs. So that synchronicity between the climate emergency, which is really important for us as an organisation, and the SDGs is fantastic actually in terms of focusing in on solutions.
So, okay, while we're speaking then, so yeah, hi. In terms of RBA, so I think the RBA declared an emergency last year. We've declared an emergency. The RBA are right behind Architects Declare and the LETI organisation. Time for talking is over. We've got to act. So what is the RBA doing? So first thing is we released the 2030 challenge last year, September. And then behind that is the RBA Sustainable Outcomes Guide, and then the plan of work has just been revised and launched last week, and we've got a new guide called the Plan for Use. So that's basically what we're doing, and then behind that, obviously, we've got the 17 goals. But what we're doing is, in terms of our industry, construction industry, we're trying to take it down very clear, measurable outcomes. So we're looking at 10 UN SDGs, and we distill further into 8 outcomes. And the 8 outcomes are, we can see operational energy use, embodied energy use, or in carbon, sustainable water cycle, sustainable conductivity and transport, sustainable land use and ecology, good health and well-being, sustainable communities and social value, and finally, sustainable life cycle costs. All these are absolutely necessary, and we need to act now. What we've done is our new plan of work is all aligned with the sustainable outcomes. Right the way through the entire design process, you can track and measure exactly what you need to do. That's the one there. And we've set the target for the construction industry. So this is the RBA 2030 challenge. If we do nothing, it's a straight line across the top. And as we know, it's plus 4 degrees. If we set ourselves in terms of our 2% reduction per year in terms of carbon emissions, that's still plus 2. So that's double the impact of what we're feeling now. So it's going to be pretty bad news, quite frankly. But at the RBA, what we're saying is all new buildings in deep retrofit by 2030 have got to be net zero. We cannot build any new unsustainable buildings. The RBA awards, which I write the criteria for, will be aligning to this 2030 challenge. So in the next few years, by 2030, no prize will be given to a building that isn't net zero by 2030. That's basically the challenge for all of us. Finally, just on this one, this goes right through to benchmarking, and we're working with all the organizations through the Construction and Industry Council to agree the benchmarks. But we don't have time. I mean, really, we're all in a bit of a hurry here. We're basically, Architects Declare, Letty are working with us. We're going to create the benchmarks this year, invite our panelists in terms of RICS and ICE and so forth to work with us, and we can set the benchmark and challenge now. Can we do it? Yes, we can. The last year's Sterling Prize winner, which I was judging, hits all our 2030 challenges now, so there's no excuse. Thank you. I kick off. So as I said, we're going fast. We've just actually, the RBA and ARB, our professional registration body, we've got a working group which is rewriting the criteria of education as we speak. It's sitting in my inbox, and I'm going to review that. Hopefully that's going to be signed off by RBA and ARB this summer, and it's going to come into action in October. Also, we're creating a CPD module, and we're looking to crowd-write the CPD modules, and then really invite all parties into this. It'll be a peer review process. So Architects Declare and Letty have already said that they're going to help us with that. So, but yeah, it's all going to be done this summer.
Do we have the skills and competencies? Probably, well, in pockets, yes, but as a group, no, probably not. Is it understandable? Yes. I mean, this is an emerging kind of skill area, and there are a lot of practicing engineers out there of all walks and architects and of all walks of life who weren't educated in this stuff, possibly don't know where to go to get the right ideas on this stuff. So I do think, you know, we have to get away from the kind of the cascading those who don't show the right behaviours currently, and bring people on with us on the journey, and actually, you know, give people access and inspire and encourage, rather than beat over the head and say you're not part of this industry anymore, you're useless. And I think there's a danger we head too much into that. So I think no, we don't have the skills competencies currently, but I think it's beholden on us as professional institutions to make sure that people have access to the right skills and training and knowledge to be able to develop those and do so in an inclusive way. In terms of making it happen quite quickly, one thing we could collaborate on, I quite like the idea of not giving any awards to any project which is not meeting the net zero target agenda. And if we all do awards, and they do all compete, let's be honest, but if we all held the line and we all said we're not going to give awards to stuff which isn't hitting that agenda, that would be interesting. Someone will blink first, though, and it'll probably be us. So, you know, I'll just throw it out there.
Yeah, I think this sector, I mean, as an outsider, seeing in a very basic way, if you go from the concept of, let's say, building a school, someone has the idea. If you talk to the children and you talk to the headmistress and you talk to the teachers, they will give you ideas such as, you know, don't put this corner here because that's where the bullying happens, or all sorts of things. I think this sector, in a sense, does work together. You have to have the ideas, the architects, you have the different elements of building a school. So I think this sector actually is ahead of the game in some ways, because you have to work together in order to get that final product. But I think what's really important is to go to the places where you haven't been before, talk to the stakeholders and the people you haven't spoken to before, and be a little bit uncomfortable, take a bit of criticism, but also stretch yourself so that you can not just continue doing things the same way, because we haven't got time to critique everything. We have to actually just get on with it. And that will involve taking risks.
I think I could probably, I totally subscribe to everything that these guys have said so far in terms of embedding and implementing the range of requirements of the whole set of SDGs. But I think in terms of the environment, and perhaps SDGs like SDG 6 and 13 on climate, and also the nature-focused ones, in our particular sector, we have been used to being in a difficult space, being in a space where we're always pushing for more ambition from decision makers. And I think the best practice that exists within our industry, and is actually quite well established and widespread, is good enough to deliver against certainly the SDGs that we're particularly focused on. What has really been lacking up until probably the last 9 months or so is a real level of ambition by government. Let's be a bit more generous, maybe 2 years. But when you look at things like the 25-year environment plan, the fact that we have an environment bill, the fact that we have an agriculture bill coming through Parliament that could revolutionise how we manage our land, that can deliver against so many of these SDGs, there's enormous potential now that we need to make sure that we realise. And I think one of the skill sets that historically our sector has not been well furnished with, let's say, is sufficiently persuasive advocacy. And I think we've failed to make the case for really ambitious action on the environment and on climate. And fortunately or unfortunately, it's fallen to teenagers to do that for us in an effective way. And I think that just picks up on the diversity piece that we need really to tap into action at all layers of society and from all players in society. I think it's vital.
Yeah, I would agree with the point about the teenagers. So our ICS HQ is based in Parliament Square, and when we began to see middle-aged pensioners chaining themselves to railings with the Extinction Rebellion group, you really understand that this environmental sensitivity that the public is feeling has just gone mainstream. So for our profession not to put it front and centre, it's just absolutely essential that today's professionals and tomorrow's professionals are equipped with the skills to be able to resolve the climate change and other issues that we've heard about, social inequality, that can be perpetuated through our built and natural environment. I wanted to pick up on a point that Mark made around behaviours. So one of the major things that our ICS will be doing, we've got quite an aggressive timetable to review our rules of conduct. And at the moment, I would say they link very closely to financial fiduciary duties. So in terms of what you're not allowed to do as a professional, linked to anti-money laundering, anti-bribery, all of those things that we're all aware of in terms of best practice. But actually, we don't currently prescribe in sufficient detail what is and what isn't acceptable in terms of sustainable development. So we've got a consultation going live in April, and we're looking to relaunch our rules of conduct in the autumn, and there will most definitely be some new stipulations on what it means to be a professional in relation to sustainability, and of course we'll be introducing mandatory CPD for all of our professionals in that area as well. One point on diversity and inclusion, we have had a very poor level of diversity historically within the surveying profession. It's creeping up, so amongst our student members, gender diversity is around 50-50. When we look at our trainee population, it's about 30% female. But then we also have a problem of women leaving the profession in the middle of their career. So we're putting in strategies to look at all of those areas and make sure that we're introducing women, people from different ethnic backgrounds, socioeconomic diversity, all elements of inclusion. We're really making sure that we reach the young people of lots of different diverse backgrounds so that they understand about the career opportunities in surveying and how they can actually make a difference in terms of the SDGs and sustainability.
So, Emily, can I just give one really small, quick, positive example of collaboration? The Partel consultation that happened just at the end of last year and this year, the MHCOG have said it's the largest consultation they've ever received. They were expecting 1,000 responses. They got 4,000. And behind the scenes, we were all working together with all the institutions and Letty and Architects Declare. It's the same message. So really, the message is there. If we speak with one voice, then we're going to be heard louder, as long as the voice is consistent. So that's the challenge. So the challenge to everybody in the audience is challenge your institutions to come and speak with one voice.
Absolutely. So on that note, does anybody have a challenge that they'd like to present to our panel? We've got a mic.
Hi, I'm speaking as a member of the Institution of Civil Engineers, so I know slightly more about them than the others. But my challenge to all the institution is, it feels like their agenda is incremental change, and I think the sustainable goals have been around for 5 years, and in reality, we're looking for transformational change, which generally means there needs to be not necessarily a pain, but a significant change of behavior. And as a member, I haven't seen anything from my institution which has made me change my behavior, point one. I know the institution, let's say, talks well, and it'd be interesting to know whether in Mark's first meeting with his Director General, whether the sustainable goals and the sustainable agenda was put front and centre. I know the institution's examinations, and it looks after all the university accreditation. I wonder how much influence or leadership they're putting on those two elements to make the change to be more sustainable. So for me, I don't think the institutions are leading. I think they're following very slowly.
That's a really good question. Can I just ask, for those of you that are members of any of these organisations, how many of you have heard a communication about the Sustainable Development Goals or seen a communication about the Sustainable Development Goals? Put your hand up. And how many of you are members in total of one of these institutions? Okay, so maybe sort of 50, 40% of you? There's a bit of a lesson there for us to take away. Can I get one more question, and then we'll come to you in a second.
Hi, my name is Sagar. I've got an organisation called Holistic Economy. The reason I set that up is because when I looked at the circular economy and the blue and the green economy, all these different acronyms, all these different terms, I noticed there's quite a few holes in the system. And I'm told that, you know, one of the goals, which is to look after women livelihoods, another one is about sustainability and circular economy and whole life cycle. I've been looking at, while everyone's saying about divest from coal, for the last 10 years I've been doing research into the whole supply chain, life cycle, cradle to cradle, of the renewables. And everyone's just talking about the point of manufacture. No one's talking about the point of extraction. And in my part of India and Africa, you've got women and men and young children who are slaves in mine pits, mining minerals for wind turbines and solar panels. And what I've been told is that the shareholder price is calculating the cost of the product at the point of purchase, not the cost of material at the point of extraction. So I would have to throw this challenge out, that what does circular economy really mean when 50% of the supply chain is completely obfuscated? And I'm now reading that all the way from the US to Ireland to Africa, end of life, 10 years down the line, the solar panels and wind turbines are dumped, sent to Africa or dumped somewhere in Ireland, and no companies want to take responsibility for it. And for me, that's not even half the circle. What needs to be done about that? Who's going to step up to that challenge?
Okay, it's a very good question. So I'm going to... got some support. So 2 points there. One is, what are you doing to make sure that this is cascading down to your membership, and what more could you be doing? And then I guess the other question there is, I'm going to reframe it slightly and say, how can the Sustainable Development Goals help us think from a whole life cycle point of view around some of the change that we need to create more urgently?
Well, I guess I should go first, seeing as Neil very kindly put the challenge straight at the ICE, and I suppose my answer there, Neil, would be, as you well know, that the ICE is a membership organisation that exists by Royal Charter to serve society through the actions of its members and not serve its members. And so my question back to you would be, what are you as a member doing to drive implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals? I don't see your name on any of the panels or societies or action groups that we've got. If you'd like to join one, then come and we'll have a chat afterwards, because we are always looking for active volunteers. I think the question on how the broader picture is a big question, and I think Well, there is no simple answer to that, is there? There's lots of work going on around how do we, procure fairer, how do we create a better system that works for everyone in the supply chain. Loads of work going on in that. That's a whole different session. We need to sort it out.
Okay, I'm going to support your member here because ICE haven't really been fully proactive in the discussions at construction industry level. So we really need seriously, if you are the person, we need to meet afterwards and have a real chat about this because the institutions, we've all got to be tied up. So anyway, that's the main thing. Coming back to the circular economy and then responsible and ethical sourcing, in terms of our whole life carbon outcome, within that we talk about ethical and responsible sourcing of materials. So in the whole life cycle, including disassembly and waste. Well, there should be no waste. It's a circular economy. So that's all embedded into that outcome. And what we're saying is to our members is really through the specification, we've got a huge buying power, and we have got to be responsible for that. So it should be ethically and responsibly sourced, everything we do, and that's really should be embedded in. So we say the challenge. The issue that I'm working with now, this is all best practice. All our guidance is best practice, but I'm looking to try and get that mandatory levels for chartered practices and chartered architects. So that's the next step on the journey.
Yeah, within our ICS we have actually launched a number of new standards which look to tackle this area. So we have a number of professionals working in facilities management, and obviously there's a huge amount of supply chain and ethical issues that they come across. So we launched a procurement professional statement which does have mandatory elements that our professionals have to abide by. We also published a responsible business insight paper in October with the launch of our Value the Planet campaign, and that's going to lead to a guidance note which has more fully fleshed out guidance on how our professionals need to make more ethical decisions throughout the entire property life cycle.
Shall I? Yeah, I mean, I'll hold my hand up as a representative of an institution and say that we're not acting fast enough at the moment, and we do need to engage a lot more urgently. And I think that is albeit the target for the SDGs is 2030. That was a underpinning principle of why we set a net zero target for 2030, not 2040 or 2050, because we really wanted to inject that urgency into our thinking. But that was last summer, and we are still in the process of working out exactly what that means in practice, both for us operationally and for what we can do to support our members. But we are working on it, and we are intending to roll a lot of that out during this year. So from a CIWEM perspective, whilst you maybe haven't seen a whole lot yet, you will do. In terms of wider life cycle, I can only agree with the points that you make, and I think we just absolutely have to make sure that when we make a transition to a low carbon economy, we absolutely have to make sure that nobody is left behind in that. And we'll do what we can through our profession to push for that.
I think it's really important that people are tweaking at the edges and looking at supply chain, but I think the fundamental problem is that we have a rapacious model of capitalism that sees labour and value and allows and globalization allows you to extract the maximum whilst paying the minimum, and that's the reality behind this, that this is happening in markets across the country, across the world. And until we actually contain this model, until we realise that people's lives do have values and that realistically we don't want 5-year-old children producing clothes, and until we actually really take some value, and that consumers also play a role in saying no to ever cheaper goods, then this is just going to continue. And we may tweak at the edges, we may have ethical codes. Those of us who are able to shop with an ethical conscience and pay a bit more will carry on doing so. But as long as wages are stagnated, as long as they have been since the Napoleonic Wars, then you will always find people who will go for the cheapest price point, and you will always find suppliers. So unless we actually change the system, we're just going to be tweaking around the edges.
Thanks. I just wanted to say something that I think actually, a point that Mark made that was really important there that was maybe lost, was that actually please just ask your professional institutions and ask your organisations what they are doing about this. Don't stay silent on it. If you want to know what you can be doing, ask them for their help. That's a really important point around influencing and engaging the right people who can actually help us do more. I think that was maybe a little bit lost, but that point was really important, was do just ask. So I know, gentlemen at the front, you've been trying to ask a question for a while, so let's come to you next.
Thank you. I'll stand up because I couldn't see where the last speaker was till the end. Mike Stanton, I'm a newly elected, I'm still in shock from being elected to a district council 10 months ago.
Congratulations.
10 years into retirement. So it's taking some adjustment. South Somerset, which is rural, agricultural, so all the problems about runoff from farmland and so on we have in spades, plus flooding on the levels. But my question really is about primarily for the RIBA, I guess, and to an institute that isn't here, which is town planning. Because the big problem we have on planning committees, and I'm vice chair of a planning committee, is we want to make developers build to passive house standards or that kind of standard of insulation and using ground source heat pumps and solar panels and so on. I've been to Goldsmith Street. Great that you gave it an award. I even talked to some of the residents. You know, exactly a model for what should be being built. But at the moment, we are not able to persuade developers, big or small. You know, I've tried it with Barratt, with Persimmon, with a small developer last night at a parish council meeting. They're not really interested in building to good, ecologically friendly standards because it costs too much. And they're frightened of passing on the cost to people who are buying houses or buying them to let. So the challenge really is, it's twofold really. How can you, particularly the architects, but also, you know, all of you, charter surveyors as well, begin to influence developers to make them build to a proper standard? And how can we work with you to make that happen?
Okay, so quite a few points there, but very, very quickly. You know, the challenge is there. We've set our members that challenge. It's voluntary, but in a couple of years, the awards will be aligning with that. So, and then the mandation comes in. So we will hopefully be mandating this. So that's what we can do in terms of our kind of voluntary side. What we're also doing is lobbying that actually the 2030 challenge, or actually net zero, should actually be part of council policy. So, and there's actually a few cities around the country now have set that. So we'll meet that, and we're trying to say, right, you set the challenge, and then we will support you. We will help the developers in terms of how you can do it at a certain cost. Goldsmith Street costs £1,800 a square metre. That is not that bad, and actually for quality housing, the problem is that we're building houses too cheaply because it's the quality isn't there. So anyway, so the problem is I need you to reinforce and force the developers. We're behind the scenes forcing and lobbying the government to then set the net zero, and this is part of the Committee of Climate Change as well, and also Partel as well. So we're trying all levers, but unfortunately the developers, and if there's any developers here, I'm very sorry, in terms of house builders, but unfortunately it needs legislation to force that particular angle. So I'm sorry about that.
So I think there's maybe a question to the rest of you there around price points, technology. Do we have what we need in order to deliver these commitments, and what's the kind of wider change that's needed to make sure that does happen? Because I think that's a really important, if we think about from a sort of value chain point of view, actually what do we need to happen at each stage in order to make sure that we deliver these ambitions? And clearly there's some challenges within that value chain if we're not getting there.
I mean, I can approach this from the perspective of flooding, maybe in the context of recent events. where there's been quite a lot of comment from local authorities about the challenges that they're facing in preventing inappropriate developments in high flood risk areas, and the conflict that there is between a very legitimate housing shortage and government targets, central government targets on housing, but the local nuance and the local factors that need to be brought to bear on those decisions that will really, really tangibly impact on the residents of those homes that do get built. There are local authorities out there who are saying that they turn down schemes on the basis of flood risk, on the basis of advice, and then those are called in and they're developed out. And there's a role, or there's undoubtedly a role for institutions such as ours and such as the others here to put out strong messages to customers, home buyers, around what they really should be demanding of developers, giving them a clear understanding of what an adequate and appropriate standard of housing is to demand and what isn't, and where the risk points are. But I think there is a really strong need for tougher regulation here as well. So I think there's a need to take action at both ends of that value chain, really, really quite urgently.
Whilst not disagreeing, I kind of want to speak almost to the defence of developer, which is an extraordinary thing, which I never thought I'd ever say, certainly with my previous new civil engineer hat on over the years, but having had numerous discussions behind closed doors, I do feel a little for developers, because developers only really do what they do either out of ignorance, because they don't know that there's a better way, or through simple choice that they can get away with it, and they're not being shown the way. It's, arguably, and I think there are really good examples out there, and I'm wearing a lanyard, so I might as well plug it. From products like people like Lovely Wavin, surrounded by all their rivals here, so why not give them a plug? Who can deliver really, really good schemes which are addressing a sustainable development situations, particularly around sustainable drainage in that example. And it's not being done through regulation. It's just being done because it's a better solution, and someone has shown, a developer, that is a better way of doing it. It's not going to cost more, it's a better solution. Why has anyone done that? It's just, it really has come down it's come down to an individual with a passion and a desire to do it a different way. And I think that comes back to my point I was making to Neil earlier. It is all this is about personal choice. This is about engineers taking personal responsibility for the schemes they design, develop, recommend, specify, and then it is about developers making their own personal choices. But the more we make our own personal choices and take responsibility to doing it the right way, then the quicker we're going to get to where we want to get to.
Yeah.
And I don't think we can hide behind regulations or use regulations, because regulation is frankly just going to come in force far too slowly for this to happen. We need to be moving faster than regulations. We need to be taking it on ourselves.
Yeah, I can only really speak from the perspective of our policy team, and better watch that I'm on message here. But I know that in the autumn they released a paper on modern methods of construction, and our ICS are really championing that in terms of ensuring that we're providing much better standard quality of build, but really we're influencing government to be able to either legislate or ensure that happens. I think that's certainly the best approach, rather than expecting developers to do that voluntarily.
Sorry, it's about what looks best in terms of case studies. That's why the RBA, we're trying to pull together the best of case studies to show it can be done at a price, and then the social value and everything kind of comes out. So there's examples out there, but we do need sort of the planners to kind of really help us on this as well.
I also just want to share that I do know that there is a council that are looking to set a precedent based on what happened last week with the Heathrow ruling, to make sure that their planning policy embeds a net zero commitment within it. and they're using Heathrow as a legal precedent for that being the case. So I do think that we might see more examples of local delivery requiring a net zero outcome as a result of some of what is currently happening in a much more public space around infrastructure. I want to come to a conversation around climate change and the SDGs, but can I just ask, does anyone have a question specifically about how to work with the goals? Because that's something we haven't really talked about. We've talked a bit of a kind of slightly higher level about how you might apply them within a professional context. But is anyone struggling to get to grips with this agenda within their organisation and have a question about that or want some help with that? We won't get around all the questions, but we are here afterwards if you want to come and ask us something.
Hi. Emily, I think you touched on this very briefly, but so I'll be quick. My name's Joel. I'm a building surveyor, part of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. So, and this question is to you, Joanne. I'm very proud you're here representing the RICS. I'm very proud to be a member, and I'm very proud of what the RICS are doing with the UN in terms of their work. But something slightly concerns me is my questions on the gender equality point 5. I attend many seminars and workshops as part of my profession to get my CPD hours in and just to continuously learn. But I'm just slightly concerned by the lack of ethnicity, the lack of diversity within the profession, and also the lack of females that I see in the profession. Many seminars, workshops I go to, about 90% of them are men. And I just wanted to know what we can do to tackle this, because the RICS is doing what they can, and their members are trying their very best to do what they can, but it's a very challenging situation when you don't really know what to do, because the RICS is a very rewarding career with a number of different pathways, open to men, women, and people from different diversities and different backgrounds. So how can we tackle this?
So thank you very much for your comments. I think the legacy that we have means that if you attend an event, you're quite likely to be surrounded by middle-aged men, to be honest. And
I was going to say that. But
yeah, so that's my experience. We are doing everything that we can to change that. So we aim to focus on people from different backgrounds in our features, in our magazine Modus. When we create videos with members of the profession talking about what they're doing, we do aim to try and select people who have the expertise from as many diverse backgrounds as possible, so that we're not kind of falling into the pale male stale syndrome that I think is common if we're not careful. I mentioned earlier, I don't know if you were in the room at the time, that we're doing a lot of work to encourage diversity in the next generation, because there's obviously not much we can do in terms of qualified professionals who are nearing the end of their career, which is probably where you interact with them at seminars and events. So we've got an Inspire workshop program in schools, and we aim to target schools specifically that have high levels of different ethnicities and from different areas where there are diverse socio-economic backgrounds. So I think historically we've had a large intake from public schools, and again we're looking to change that because we need to be representative of the communities that we're serving. So we are doing a lot. We also do have BAME networks and diversity networks to encourage different members of the profession to get together and also to be seen, to be visible. So hopefully you're attending a lot of events, but we need to encourage more women, more people from the different ethnic backgrounds to be attending our events as well. But if you want to come and have a chat to me afterwards, I'm happy to talk about how we could involve you if you're interested.
Thank you.
Anda?
I think this is a broad problem in a lot of sectors because of the traditional lack of education of women previously, and women only, being able to get degrees relatively recently. I speak as a historian, so for me it's relatively recent. We're still seeing that issue, and what we're seeing is an industry that looks very different to how it wants to look. And although we always need pioneers, we always need people to be the first people to go and do something. But for a lot of people, they do need to see those role models. They do need to see an industry that they feel reflects them. Interestingly, when the NUS did, and the Equality Trust and IEMA did some research among students, a lot of students from ethnic minorities just didn't think about this kind of area as something that they felt they were interested in. They didn't have much information about it. I think, speaking to the point of if you're going to public schools and you're going to Russell Group, you're automatically cutting out a huge swathe of people from different socioeconomic backgrounds as well. I think the key thing is you go to where people are. You don't expect people to come to you because you've got a special initiative or a scheme or something that's, at the bottom of your website. And I think it's also about making that commitment, and if necessary, to think about having quotas, to think about recruiting in different ways, but also to talk to other organisations who have expertise in these areas and who are able to guide you and have a look at where it might be that you can improve your practice as well.
I also just think, so something that Vanda and I were actually talking about when we arrived was actually just recognising that sometimes there's a culture within an organisation or within a space that you don't necessarily realise is there unless you're on the receiving end of the negative side of that culture. So I think there is something about each of us just asking, do we really understand the experiences of young women coming through our organisations or those from an ethnic background coming through our organisation? Do we actually really understand this? Do we understand how our actions can impact on that person and how they feel included? There is just something about a little bit of self-reflection, because I think we're very often saying, well, we've got policies, we've got education programmes, we're talking about what's working really well, but actually we're not asking ourselves whether we're actually questioning our own behaviours and our own attitudes around this. So maybe that's something you can start with. I'm sure you understand from your own experiences, but maybe within your organisation you can start having those conversations with colleagues. We've only got 10 minutes left, and I want to have a really important conversation because this is the only panel session at Future Build this year on the Sustainable Development Goals. The focus is on the climate emergency, and we've talked a lot about the need for action on the climate emergency. But actually we really have to think about the relationship between these two agendas, because they're not separate, but they seem to be considered as separate in a lot of areas. So I'd really like to just ask you all to maybe just share what you think is unique and helpful about the Sustainable Development Goals when we're thinking about action on climate.
I can kick off. I think the thing is, it's about unintended consequences. In the last, when the Labour government sort of had net zero as their goal, last year was meant to be net zero, by the way, if the Labour government was still in power. That was going to. Anyway, that spawned lots of unintended consequences, overheating, big issue, and sort of some highly insulated homes with not proper shading and things like that. So we've been very careful when we're writing the sustainable outcomes this time, is that the unintended consequences have got to be considered, and that must be holistic. So this is the whole thing. So the UN Sustainable Development Goals have got to be considered together. Anything you do must be through a mesh and through a lens of all aspects, or else we're doomed to make the same mistakes. We're going to rush into, and I think the point in terms of batteries and wind generators. So batteries, the lithium poisoning in 2 countries in South America is beyond anything. So we've got to be very careful of what we do here. Anyway, that's how we use them. Yeah.
I think I would flip the whole conversation around, because we've been speaking very much about material and what we're doing materially. And I would say that if you look after the people, if you place planet and people at the centre of it and their well-being, and if people are paid enough, if their well-being is looked after, then they won't necessarily, we know this from research on mental health, be so eager to consume. The flip side of that as well is making sure that what is being consumed is being recycled, that we're not just creating more and more material for our planet to bear.
I think, having said that, we are working the B Corps tool into our thinking and our planning around the climate emergency. I think that is really, it's bringing certain considerations to light that we just would have skated over before. So, and my feeling probably is that if we can deliver against the SDGs, we'll probably meet the climate and ecological targets that we need to meet as well. So maybe we should be looking at it that way round. And certainly as an organisation at SCI, whilst we were looking at the SDGs and we put a lot of emphasis on their importance, the climate declaration, the climate emergency declaration seemed more urgent. And actually, I think if you flip it around, you'll meet the climate stuff, but you'll achieve so much more besides. And the SDGs is just that mesh, that framework to enable you to identify all those unintended consequences, the additional benefits that you can achieve and the wider benefits that you can achieve through taking certain actions. So they have to be integrated and one and the same.
I think I echo that a lot, actually. I think it's interesting. I say I've only been at the IC for a month, and the IC has been very focused on the SDGs for 2 years or more. But my gut on joining was actually the climate crisis is the real and present emergency. We should be focusing on net zero. But actually, then when you take a step back and particularly look at the global angle, and you actually ask yourself, what is the actual here and now crisis in parts of Africa? I mean, it's water. If you look at parts of Southeast Asia, it's security, it's safety. You know, you look at other parts of the world, the issues are different, and they aren't as simple as net zero climate. So I think that when you look at it through that genuine global lens, I think you do come quickly back to actually the SDGs remain the absolute correct headline focus, and we have to not get sidetracked or allow them to be neglected. I say that with one caveat, but I do take small issue with the SDG 13 around climate action, which is very much about resilience to climate change rather than mitigating climate change, and it's almost the SDG that you do when everything else has failed and you accept that the world has gone to hell in a handcart and the floods are storming and all that's happening. So I do have a bit of an issue with SDG 13. It's kind of a bit negative, but nevertheless, I think the SDGs are the focus.
Just in defence of the SDGs, I want to clarify that there are targets under goals 7, 8 and 9 that are all about productivity and materials use, and energy efficiency.
And I think that linkage needs to be better made. I think that's the observation there.
So I think from our ICS perspective, we are certainly championing fiscal measures to incentivise the right behaviours. We've also been looking to influence investor attitudes, which I'm pleased to say are changing. They're moving in the right direction, but there's still a long way to go in terms of what they will invest their money into. And, you know, the green premium has been around for a couple of years, but is it really front and centre of the investors' minds when they're thinking about where to allocate funding for projects? And then finally, I would say RICS, we're looking forward to COP26 in November, and we're certainly looking to really radically influence our profession to deliver net zero. I think realistically that's going to be 2050, and I salute any of the organisations that have committed to that by 2030.
So, sorry, just one thing I forgot to mention. So in terms of picking up the point, retrofit, so that's the first thing that we talk about within what we're doing. It's basically it's reducing consumption. So really picking up the point there, that is absolutely true, front and centre. That's it. We've got to, and we're actually asking our architects and design team, you've got to offer a retrofit. You've got to say to the client, do you need a new building, right? It's going to do us out of a job. I'm sure it is, well, maybe not. Anyway, so that's the first thing. The last thing is look for the benefits, the added value. So, for instance, the Goldsmith Street, coming back to that as an example, at the same time as building a sustainable future, we've actually lifted that community out of fuel poverty. So the two go hand in hand. So there's win-wins. We've got to look for the win-wins.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask you each just to tell the audience what one thing you are going to do differently to take this agenda forward as a result of the conversation you've had today. Who wants to go first?
Is that me personally or the organisation?
The organisation, but if you think that there's something you would like to do differently as a result of today, then you can share that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, personally, in recent times, I have considered my consumption choices much more than I would have done even 5 years ago. So I think, I would ask everybody to be thinking along those lines, really, in terms of consumption and the kind of mass consumption that we've grown up in, and to question how responsible we need to be as individuals as part of the collective. In terms of our ICS, we would like to see measurable implementation of the SDGs. I think that's really what our Value the Planet campaign is all about.
So I think it's simple. I think it's take personal responsibility. I think every civil engineer should be, asking themselves the carbon impact of their work. And I think they should feel empowered and entitled to ask that of their bosses and of their companies. And if enough people are making enough noise, then the companies will change, the policies will change, the institutions will change.
Yeah.
We will get behind it. I think it all comes back to personal responsibility. And,
Great.
bring it on.
Alistair?
I want to say something that picks up on the challenge that we're not doing things fast enough or loud enough or ambitiously enough. I think the one thing that we're really focused on this year, in terms of our emissions, we are doing really well on our Scope 1 and 2 emissions. We're very conscious that probably the biggest area we're going to have to take a lot of action in terms of our Scope 3 emissions is our transport. We, as an institution, we encourage people to travel a lot. We do a lot of events. We hold a lot of meetings. And we're trying to encourage our members as part of those meetings not to travel half as much. So really revolutionising the way that we hold our meetings, I think, is the thing that I want to do.
I'm actually going to come to you last, Vando. Gary, sorry.
Yeah, so on a personal level, the amount of flying, that's a concern, really. So I'm doing as much as I can on that one. At a professional level, we asked the same question of all, in terms of we were writing the 2030 challenge. And the first thing is that we've got to go back and phone our clients up and then help them fine-tune their buildings. There's up to 20% reduction in energy use that can be made if we come back in and help our clients. So we're going to come and read meters, basically. That's what we should do.
And Vanda, as the almost last word, can you share your action?
This is a personal action, and I think Emily's going to really appreciate it, which is I'm going to finally finish a sewing course so that I can recycle my own clothes, encourage my son and his friends to do the same, and just really make sure that I'm recycling my clothes, adding to them, and trying not to buy as much as I probably have done in the past.
The context there is a mutual love of crafting, so that's where that's come from. So thank you very much, all of you, for your time this afternoon. Thank you very much for coming. I just want to share one message, which is that Vanda and I both talked at the beginning about inequality and people being left behind in our communities in the UK. We've also talked about the recent events in terms of flooding, and I think in all of this focus on getting to net zero, we might be forgetting the fact that we do need to be thinking about the people that are experiencing the most disadvantage in our society and are the least resilient to climate change. So actually, as actors in the built environment, you play a very critical role in making sure that those people are the priority for our focus when it comes to transitioning to a net zero future. That's what the SDGs can help you do, because they embed this principle of leaving no one behind. So I just leave you with that. That call to action from me is please think about those people, please think about leaving no one behind, and use the SDGs to do that. Thank you very much.